Okay, so I'll talk through essentially the CC reimbursement fund, and that might be a bad name for it because that probably carries some immediate reactions for some people, but is basically recognizing that there's no compensation yet for the Constitutional Committee, and we already see kind of a lack of interest in fulfilling the role. But if people don't fulfill the role, we're stuck. Like our governance system will stall until people fill the role. And it's a role that we want responsible people to be filling who do a good job. So aside from some of the other challenges they have, this kind of focuses on 3 specific parts of their job. One is we kind of expect them to set up secure hardware, and for their own protection, some of them we know have wanted to set up legal entities. Both of those things come with a cost. It's not massive, but that comes with a cost. And then we know also that to some extent they would like to have subject matter experts to help them with reviewing some really technical proposals. And in some cases, if there's legal gray areas, some just outside legal opinions. So those are the, I guess, 2 areas: 1, secure setup; 2, external expert consultation; and then 3, they don't have any real user-friendly tooling for managing their credentials yet. So governance tooling broadly has covered what DREPs need, what delegators need, but has largely left behind the SPOs and the Constitutional Committee members. They're a smaller subset of people, and we assume that they have some level of technical capabilities. So that's why, like, I think products aren't really built for that role at this point. But essentially, you're saying like that should be built. And then Ryan, you're saying the other challenge, if there isn't enough volunteers for the CC role, is that only people who have a vested interest in seeing their own proposals pass will sign up. Yeah. So if you don't have people with good intentions who are there to be doing some civil duty, then yeah, you end up with people who have something to gain from it since it's not paid or even reimbursed otherwise. So I completely agree with that. So then if I essentially what this is it's such a small amount. If you look at just paring down to what do you need to securely set up the hardware in a legal entity, that is probably too small for a treasury withdrawal. So we're kind of thinking about what would some other funding mechanisms be. Don't have a good answer for that yet. And whether this should be a recurring fund or something that's just a kickstart until compensation comes down the pipeline. So essentially this recognizes we at least have a gap where ensuring people have the funds to set up a secure and kind of a safe environment for them to operate as a CC member doesn't exist. So not only is it a difficult job, takes a lot of time, but then it also costs people money to do it properly. So it's really kind of a hard role to fill. So I go back to some of the why behind this. This is basically drafted as a fund that can help while the compensation discussions are ongoing. So it's recognizing that for the next maybe year, or we don't even know how long, compensation is not in existence for these people. And the way that this fund was drafted was also to address the biggest critiques from the rationales gathered for the previous CC compensation governance action. So the pros, when people were voting yes, or even if they voted no but qualified why, for that compensation governance action, which just as like a quick reminder, I think it was $1 million ADA for the 7 members, and I think only 5 of the 7 were requesting funding within that cohort. So when people were voted yes, or had something positive to say, they saw the value in compensating the CC because they want them to do a good job, be professional, be responsive. And they think that compensation also helps with Constitutional Committee independence, which is what you're saying there, Ryan. On the cons, or the reasons why they didn't like that proposal in particular, a lot of people in DREPs mentioned that the oversight structure was lacking. So essentially, I think the Constitutional Committee was going to set up a like multi-sig of all of the Constitutional Committee members to oversee paying the individual members. And there was no alignment really to quality of outcome. It was kind of just like a salary, like you get paid no matter what you do. People also thought that that was too expensive, not necessarily because they thought outright it was too expensive, but more that was qualified that it was too expensive because they lacked details about how much time it actually took to serve as a CC member and how the million ADA was arrived at, because they didn't break it down in that proposal. The other major debate or reason why people didn't like it is they didn't want to compensate the Constitutional Committee without also compensating DREP. So they felt it needed to be kind of a package deal. So Simon, this might relate more to broadly the incentives work in terms of, if you haven't looked at that feedback, just what people were saying. But in the like proposal for coming up with a reimbursement fund in the meantime for the Constitutional Committee, we've written in a way that's very detailed about where we got our pricing estimates, how it's broken down in each bucket, and it has different buckets. So I don't know if you can see the screen, Ryan, but it's basically a bar chart. The smallest bucket that you could fund would essentially be $50,000 if you wanted to fund a legal entity for 7 members and secure hardware. So that includes air gap device plus a safe for all 7 members, just recognizing that nobody's had this since the initial first members of the Constitutional Committee. Some of them were funded by IOG to get these things set up. And then since then, there's been no financial support that I'm aware of. So that's kind of like the bottom, like smallest amount that you could fund to give Constitutional Committee members that setup. And essentially the rationale is it costs the ecosystem significantly more than $50,000 worth of effort to pass a new Constitutional Committee governance action if somebody were to have their keys compromised and you need to rotate in new credentials. So that's kind of like the threshold of it makes economic sense to do that a little bit. And then whether or not you want to build a stipend for consultation for them to have access to technical and legal subject matter experts, and whether or not you would want to fund additional tooling for them is kind of like a secondary question. So that's essentially, we did the research to put together like the numbers, the buckets of what should be funded to help out the Constitutional Committee, but we're not exactly sure where to go from here. We've shared this at a high level with the Civics Committee, and we shared it with Jack as well. And I know Jack is thinking about if this is something Intersect may be able to fund, but it's an unknown. So that's essentially the idea, the rationale, and kind of where it sits right now. Is it's like the research has been done, but where we actually get the funding, not quite sure. So I don't know if you have any thoughts, open to hearing, or critiques, but that was the work we've done so far.
Yeah, I think only thing I can say about this sounds very reasonable. There's not even anything for their time or anything, it seems like.
Yeah, so it's a clear distinction between compensation versus reimbursement. So it's not compensation, it's reimbursement for costs that they would incur. And I can share the link to the actual write-up. The secure hardware and legal entity setup, I feel, is pretty non-controversial in terms of like, we want them to do their job and it costs money to set things up in a responsible manner. So if a CC member would like to claim back, the idea is this is a pot that the CC could claim from, but they're certainly not required. So if somebody has a problem with, let's say, Intersect administrating it, they don't want to have funds coming from Intersect or have any ties at all, then they just don't use it. And so it's a fund available with a maximum amount funded. And if it's not used, it can just be carried over to the next year as new members come in or out. But yeah, it's not compensation, it's paying them back for those things.
And this also doesn't compensate for, like, or doesn't pay them for for future efforts. This is like,
Yeah.
but it says 5 years, right? I mean, we don't have it for 5 years yet.
So the bottom on the 5-year is if this would be more a grant. And again, the oversight details of what we're proposing are in the full document, but for just managing their credentials, so key generation or credential generation and signing, and then 5 years of maintenance for that tooling. So that would be a grant paid for the build, and then it wouldn't just be like given up front. You would pay them
Right,
for
right.
the maintenance. And this isn't even the CC members themselves. This would probably go to a tooling provider.
Right, I understand, yeah. But the rest is for the last year, or because the technical and legal consultation, I think, did that happen already?
So technical and legal consultation, no, that would be essentially the idea is it's a pot of funding that's available if the Constitutional Committee members would like to request a review of a specific governance action. So the model that we're suggesting is if 2 CC members are interested in getting consultation, then they can request 1 expert consultation, and it has to be shared with all the CC members. If 3 or 4 CC members are requesting review of a specific governance action, they could get up to 2 outside opinions, and it would actually be intersect or whatever the administrator, their job to go find the experts, contract them, and manage the contracting so that the CC members aren't dealing with that side of things. So this would be an on-demand request per governance action.
And the legal entity setup, so how many entities would that be able to set up? Is it,
So it would be
yeah.
just 1 per member. So essentially it breaks down into, just divide.
But even if that's like retrospective, there's more than 7 members or 7.
Yeah. So this is basically set at 7. All right. It's adjusting for 7 of the active members, but not going back in the past beyond the current 7 members. But recognizing that all 7 that are sitting on the Constitutional Committee after these new elections are finished, none of them have had the ability to get refunded for these things. So if they can prove proof of receipts, basically, for setting up a legal entity, that the current all 7 members would have access to this. But on an ongoing basis, any individual CC member can only request these funds once. So you set up a legal entity once, don't ask us to set up a legal entity next year, unless there's some extenuating circumstance. And it would then, from that point forward, really just be the new members. So I have the next slide shows what does this look like next year. So next year there'd be, and things are changing because now the minimum is set to 5. So this was all assuming 7. Put that aside. The next election cycle, you only have 3 members coming in. So the fund shrinks to only setting up a legal entity for those new members coming in. Key generation and signing tools was not a renewing type of cost, except for after the 5 years, if you still need to pay for maintenance, if it was a good tooling. But then because the technical legal consultation is scaled based on governance action volume, that cost would stay the same. So that's the thinking anyways.
Okay, yeah.
I can give some thoughts if you don't mind. I can critique it a little bit. I don't think it's a bad idea. I think it's a pretty good idea, but there's definitely some challenges, and I wrote down a few of them to share. So okay. I think tracking in USD is going to be subject to volatility, right? So if we say, I mean, obviously, if this is at some point going to come from the Treasury in some degree, if the price of beta goes up, it's going to be potentially, much has to go back to the Treasury. If it goes down, it's going to not be enough. And there's going to be conversions that have to happen in there. So that adds some complication. The other one is trying to itemize costs, I think, is also going to add a lot of overhead, especially when you consider there's different legal jurisdictions, different kinds of hardware wallets, different technical setups and different levels of technical skill for different CC members. Like maybe some can use the command line just fine and others need kind of a web-based tool kind of thing. So I think trying to itemize costs is going to add some overhead. And then the other one that I wrote down is setting up in such a way to reimbursed cost incentivizes higher cost, right? So if you're a CC member and you're like, okay, I'm gonna be reimbursed for whatever I do, I'm gonna go out and find the best legal representation, the best hardware wallet, and everything. I mean, get the best of the best, which isn't necessarily what we want for for treasury spend, especially when the primary concern of the previous budget proposal was being too expensive. So I do think this is like definitely something that's been needed and something I think about a lot. So my alternative idea, I've shared this with Sam on before, is compensating with ADA per explicit vote on a qualifying proposal. And then you don't have to worry about any of the overhead, any of the conversions, right? And you could just set up a treasury pilot program. And this way, by setting up per explicit vote, also you're incentivizing the CC members to actually be, participating and not missing votes, right? So let's say you don't do info actions because maybe we decide that CC members aren't required to vote on info actions, but every other governance action they do require. So let's say they get per seat, they get 100, 200 ADA per vote on each of those actions. That way you don't have to track any of the overhead. You don't have to convert. And it's going to incentivize people to want to do that. And it's also going to make them bullish on ADA, right? Like if you're receiving ADA, you're going to be wanting, your incentives are going to be aligned with increasing the value of ADA, as opposed to I'm getting paid in USD is basically a short on ADA. So I think that lines up the incentives a lot better. So that's something I've.
Okay. Yeah, this isn't necessarily saying that it should be or should not be paid in USD, just on that point. That's just how I priced things and looked up like, okay, how much does hardware actually cost? How much does it cost generally to set up a legal entity, and then add a little bit extra because it's a niche area. But it doesn't solve the problem of how much is sitting in the fund versus how much ADA is worth.
Yeah, that's always going to be a challenge for every budget thing ever, because everybody gets paid, and they pay the bills in dollars usually. So
right, until the treasury is like part stables or something like that. Yeah, so that still remains. Paying CC members per vote, I think that is not a bad idea for the CC members in the way that it could be for DREPs, because you actually want the CC members to vote on everything. DREPs, just paying them to vote for the sake of voting, might lead to poor outcomes. But I think one of the other things on that one is just the oversight of, you could still have CC members just casting a thoughtless vote to get their ADA, when otherwise they may have not voted if they didn't have enough time or something. So I know that would be kind of like a counter argument to that model, and knowing how much do you pay them per vote is questionable, because you don't know how many governance actions are going to come in until they come in. So
this is true, but also paying per governance action makes that scales, right? So if I get X,
it does make it scale for effort. Yeah. So that feels more like a compensation model than reimbursement. I think that's more part of the long-term conversation.
Agreed.
And this, I'm just trying to solve, like, in the next 2 years, we still need good people signing up. And we want them to have a secure setup, not just.
So I pitched it before as some sort of pilot program, and then you just look retroactively, like, okay, what CC members voted on which actions, and you pay it out quarterly or every 6 months or however often you want to do it, and then just with intersect oversight. That's one option. But yeah, it is definitely something that needs to be solved sooner rather than later. It's just trying to get the community to agree on a thing is tough, because the last one failed by a pretty large margin. So, and now the price of ADA is like a fraction of what it was back then. So it's probably even. And then
I don't see this honestly as being a successful type of treasury withdrawal, because there's already way too many big things being asked for and questions about, can we even, like, do we need to expand the NCL, and should we? So I think this is too small for the attention anyways. especially if you pare it down to just the top 2 buckets for secure hardware and legal entity setup. The other 2 I consider to be more nicer to have. Really nice to have, but if all you're doing is the bare minimum, it would be those top 2 buckets. So I'm kind of wondering if the funding, once Intersect gets its funding, if they've got enough in their budget to cover this maybe for the first year. When I talked to Jack, his thoughts were also on the legal entity setup, whether or not that is something that really has to be done again and again, or if there is a umbrella entity that could be set up that CC members can join. I imagine that was considered and thought of early on in governance, but I don't know if we actually have a good legal analysis of whether that's feasible or not, because there's always going to be different jurisdictions, and that might be why you need to set up your own entity if you sit in different jurisdictions. So he was kind of wondering, can that be more just a one-time thing rather than a recurring cost? And that's an open question that we don't have answers to.
Yep.
So I don't know how much it helps if I think you really kind of just need legal professionals to answer that question. So I don't feel like I can really research that one and solve it. So to me, that one's, I don't know who can solve that question. But I think the only thing that maybe the working group can help with is if it wants to endorse this, and see if the civics committee wants to actually endorse it also, if that would help push it along the consideration from Intersect as to whether or not it can be funded, or if there's any other ideas where we could fund it from in the meantime. I don't know.
So from my view, I think I really like to look at it in a systematic view, and then I would think, in my opinion, it's the best way to go about it is use this number to inform future reimbursement in ADA. Yeah, and for the people who, put in their time and money so far, it would be, of course, a bad outcome, but for the future, it would give them more incentive to, do all that by themselves. And then when they know that they get reimbursed for that with certain ADA, then they can, be flexible as well.
I'm trying to grab the link. So you mean basically saying that this publishing that the fund in ADA might be available, and that might encourage people to actually set up their stuff and claim later?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that they would basically take the risk of, setting up the legal entity, knowing that they get so and so much ADA in the future, and setting up the hardware and possibly, having to deal with legal consultation and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as long as they know that it's actually going to be available, and it's not like maybe it will be available. If
Yeah,
it's just a maybe, I don't know if that helps much.
The only I do understand, like maybe I'm wrong. Like it would be less cost if Intersect could take care of all that, as you say, put it all under one umbrella, at least at the beginning. Like I think in the long term, of course, that's different, but that's not what it's trying to solve here.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we've made it through like the next CC, the current CC election. And well, we haven't finished that election, but we've got 10 candidates in the pipeline. So at least there's choice for people to pick from. And they'll do what they do. And we'll hope that nobody has to like revote to rotate credentials in the meantime. So that basically gives a year to sort out something to help.
I think you said you did present this to the civics committee already, right?
Yeah.
When was that? Because I'm not sure.
June 4th.
Okay, yeah. Maybe I was missing that one.
Yeah, the feedback we got, or the critique on that meeting, we got just the concern where if you have to submit expenses to intersect or any one body, that might expose the details of like how you've set up your keys, or how you got your infrastructure set up. So that was the concern we got out of that discussion, but otherwise, no major critiques. Of course, people could have just been not saying they think it's a bad idea and rather stay quiet, but that's the critique we got from that meeting. But otherwise, they were also discussing in that meeting what to do about the fact that they only had the exact number of candidates as how many seats we needed to fill, and they're trying to decide how to handle that. So it was also kind of fresh that running for the CCC seat is not an exciting role, and that's kind of a problem that needs to be solved. So I think it landed at a time where it was relevant as well. Whether this solves that problem completely, probably not, but each of these is aimed at helping to make the role more attractive to honest participants in the meantime.
And you could also imagine just covering the first two.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
There's the link to the actual document that it breaks this down, shows where I got the estimates. Also talks about the oversight structure that we suggest for it. So it takes a little bit of time to read it. But I'm happy to kind of like continue working on if it needs to be changed, if oversight structure doesn't make sense, if we think it should be done some other way. And then at some point I can circle back with Jack to see. We'll wait for the treasury withdrawals, I think, to be done on chain. I don't know if the intersect ones have landed yet, but I think it's a couple more weeks or a couple more days at least for those to finalize, and then I'll see what he thinks. So I guess that's my like next goal, is get it to a shape that we feel is the most defensible, and then see what he thinks.
And I take it intersect takes the typical 3% administrator fee.
Don't know. I haven't had that conversation with like in that level of detail, because if it comes, so I'm imagining maybe, and maybe this is not, maybe there's no wiggle room at all. But if they get funded, that this could be part of their like governance facilitator role. So they facilitate the whole CC elections as needed. But then that's the only support they're giving. So if this could be an additional incremental support set up on top of that, as part of like running an election, essentially you add this into that process. And if that funding can cover that, I don't think there's an additional admin fee, because it's just part of how they're actually using those funds.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's definitely easier, just those top two buckets, to find, like, to justify. But having something like a grant for building better tools is a bigger spend. It's actually smaller, so I broke it down as 110,000 to actually build. But if you want to add on 5 years of maintenance, because we're really good at funding tools and then forgetting about maintenance costs, I didn't want to just leave that behind. It's a lot more expensive to keep it maintained, just based on industry averages for how much it costs to maintain versus develop. So if you want to share this with other folks who have attended the working group in the past, beyond just who's on the call, if anybody wants to add critique, I'll open this up for comment. Actually, I think it's just you right now.
Perfect. Yes.